This is a 2021 Nissan Navara NP300 pickup, and in this video I'm going to fit that tow bar. So in this video I'll show you how to fit a tow bar and electrics to a Navara, and while this is the NP300, the same is going to apply to the D40 version, the Mercedes X-Class and the Renault Alaskan. The tow bar I've purchased is the Tow Trust TNI S1, and it's all just arrived and I've just unpackaged it. So we've got the tow bar there, the mounting brackets and all the fixings. I bought a standard 50mm tow ball and the customised wiring harness for the Navara. So initially, when choosing what tow bar to buy for the Navara, I certainly didn't want this tubular design tow bar. There's another rectangular box section one which is far slimmer, sits higher up on the vehicle just below the rear bumper, and it's not quite so obvious, it looks far better. But then after looking at the P.F. Jones website, where they list 5 different manufacturers of tow bar for the Navara, it was quite clear that the Tow Trust one was the one to go for if you wanted the heaviest duty tow bar. It has a nose weight of 195 kilograms, whereas the others are 140 kilograms. However, there is another circular tube designed tow bar which has a nose weight of 190 kilograms, but that was considerably more expensive than the Tow Trust one. And because I tow this large 18-foot trailer with a particularly heavy winch up front, the tow ball weight was quite important to me. I've also previously fitted a Tow Trust tow bar on my Land Rover Discovery 4, and the Tow Trust tow bar is regarded as one of the best tow bars available for the Land Rover, and the quality of their stuff is just amazing. And it's also one of the cheapest tow bars as well. So I've purchased all of this kit from towbars-uk.co.uk. They were the cheapest supplier for the TNS i1 tow bar. So that has cost me £150.89, including VAT. The standard 50mm tow ball cost only £13, but it's the custom wiring loom, which is where they often sting you. And on some of the websites, these got very expensive, like in the £200 or £300 range. This has cost me £179.25. But anyway, it's still ridiculous that the wiring cost more than the tow bar. But I'll put all the links and any additional information in the video description below. The quality of this Tow Trust tow bar is just really nice. This is all 8.5mm thick steel. It's all laser cut. It's just beautiful quality. So now let's get this fitted, and the instructions say this will only take 20 minutes, but I suspect I'm going to take longer than that. But anyway, we've got the instructions here, and this is for the Navara, the previous D40 and the NP300, and of course the Mercedes X-Class. And then we've got various options here, and it took me a while to work out what the difference is between all these pictures because they all look exactly the same. But anyway, it's the mounting hole here. When you've got a vehicle with a bumper, this bracket mounts further back, and when you don't have a bumper, it mounts right on the edge. So basically, if you've got a bumper on your vehicle, you mount the bracket like that, and if you don't have a bumper, you mount it like that, so the tow bar sits closer to the body. And then you mount this to the vehicle chassis with these brackets, and then you have another one there. So regardless of what manufacturer tow bar you buy, the mountings are going to be the same. They're going to use the same screw holes in the chassis rails. So the mounting is going to be pretty much the same. So this video will apply to whatever brand of tow bar you buy. So let's get this fitted. That's the easy bit, and then I'll cover the electrics later on in the video. So this does look very simple to fit, but I'm just going to sort through the nuts and bolts first, because I see they do vary by 5mm in length, and you have got 2 different pitches. So I'm just going to sort those out and group them all together so I put the right bolt in the right hole. So that's well worth sorting those out so the right nuts and washers fit the right bolts and the right pitch type. So I've got the pickup up on the ramp here and I've removed the spare wheel so I don't bang my head on it. And the tow bar is just going to mount on the chassis rails here, and everyone is going to be the same. It's going to be using the same fixings. If you've got a tow eye here, then you need to remove those from both sides, but my vehicle doesn't have that. It does, however, have this bar on, which you can leave, but I think I'm going to remove it because this is going rusty, and this vehicle's only 4 years old and it's done 52,000 miles. But it's quite surprising how rusty that is already. And apparently these are fitted on the 2019 and newer Navaras just because these have the new dual rate rear springs which raise the vehicle up by 25 or 35 millimeters or so, and regulations stipulated that the rear bumper was then too high, so they fit this bar as standard just to bring that gap down for crash protection. So that's why they fit these as standard apparently on these later vehicles. But before I take this off, I think I'll just get the tow bar offered up loosely here and see what it looks like. So I'm going to follow the instructions step by step, and the first thing they say is you need to mount these brackets on the chassis rails in the vehicle with these two bolts at the top. And then clearly you mount those to it and you assemble all this on the vehicle. Which I guess makes sense because if you assembled it all beforehand, which I guess you could do, and then offer it all up to the vehicle, you're lifting all the metalwork. Whereas if you mount that and then those to that, the only thing you've got to lift is the actual tow bar at the end and mount it to the two brackets which are hanging there. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow these instructions step by step. So the first thing it says is we need to mount these to the inner side of the chassis rails. And I see there's two diagonal bolts there, so clearly that's going to go like that. But of course, these threads aren't particularly clean, so I've given all the threads a squirt of penetrating oil before I put the bolts in. So the bracket's in loose so I can see what adjustment there is, and as you can see it's right up against this bar, which is fine, the bar can stay, but it gives me an idea where the tow bar is going to sit. So I think I'm going to remove that because the new tow bar is going to be pretty close to the underside of the bumper here. So this just isn't needed anymore. And as it's going rusty, I might as well remove it now while I've got access to it. It's also a shame that this bracket does have a scratch in the paint from new. It was obviously done in transit. So I'm going to put a bit of black paint on that now so that doesn't rust. And that's got time to dry while I take this off. So the next stage is to mount this bracket on the new plate there using a smaller flat washer on the outside and the larger flat washer on the inside. So at this stage I'm not tightening any of the bolts, keeping it all loose. So if you've got an NP300 you have to put these straps in as well. So we've got to mount that strap there and just put the bolt I've got in my hand there in that forward hole there. So that's the strap on this side done as well, and these straps have a bend in them. They've got a bit of a kink here, and it's obvious which way round you mount the strap because that's just compensating for the thickness of your angle bracket here. So next we've just got to put 3 bolts through those to mount all of this to the chassis rail. It's such a simple job, this. So in total there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts on either side mounting the tow bar to the chassis rails. So this was meant to be a 20-minute job, but I've spent 20 minutes just trying to get a bolt in here. So I've taken this side apart again because when I was putting these 3 bolts up into the chassis rail here, I found that this one doesn't go in the hole, and I've really been struggling to get it to find its thread. And it looks like the captive nut is slightly off center, hasn't been welded in the right place. So I've either got to try to drill this outer bit of metal on the chassis a little bit bigger, or try to find an M12 tap and re-thread it. I suspect that's the way I'm going to have to go first, but I don't have one, but I'll see if my father's got one. All these captive nuts in the chassis rail on this are metric fine thread. So these bolts are an M12 by 1.25 pitch. Unfortunately, my father had a tap which is M12 fine, which is quite a rare thing really. So with that and possibly a round file, I'll be able to open this up so then I can get the bolt into that nut there. So fortunately that was pretty easy. That's now cleaned up the thread. Certainly felt it cut something initially, but that was only easy because I had the right tools for the job. So next, just got to bolt the cross member in with the nuts and bolts I've got left, but there are only 2 star washers and I've got 4 bolts, but then these are nylon lock nuts, so I suppose it doesn't really matter. But there are 8 washers. And then the 2 bolts which are left are obviously for putting the toe ball on there. So at this stage you really need another pair of hands, because I don't think I'm going to be able to hold that one-handed and slide in some bolts at the same time. This is a heavy piece of metal. I'm on my own today, so my extra pair of hands is the forklift. So all we've got to do now is tighten all of these bolts up and torque them up to the correct value, which is all listed there on the instructions. And all the torque settings are listed for every size of bolt and the pitch, and also the tensile strength of the bolts. We've got 8.8s there and 10.9s there. So for example, these ones going into the chassis are 10.9 bolt and they're fine pitch. So these are 130 Newton meters. And that does seem very tight for those captive nuts in the chassis. I've got some leverage on this torque wrench and it hasn't clicked yet, so I'm not sure whether I feel comfortable doing these up to quite that high torque. There. It's probably the height I'm doing this at, but this feels so much more than 130 Newton meters. So all the bolts are torqued up and that's the tow bar fitted. It is a pretty easy job. I have just loosely put the ball on, but I haven't tightened this up yet because I don't know yet what height that needs to be at. I've got to wait until this is on the ground. And then in the morning I'll tackle the electrics. There is one other thing you need to be aware of when fitting a tow bar on a Navara, and that is the exhaust pipe. Because on some of them the exhaust pipe is then blowing onto the back of the tow bar and it causes them to rust really quickly. When the car is doing a DPF regen, the hot gases just soon ruin the finish on the tow bar and they really badly corrode. This one doesn't look too bad. I think that's going to blow below it. I know if you buy a genuine Nissan one you do get some sort of stainless steel heat shield. But in this case, that doesn't look too bad. I thought it was going to be closer, and if it was, I was going to cut this off and put a bend on it. And I'll put a picture of what someone else has done, because someone else has put a bend on that way, because it is a bit of an issue. But this tow bar seems like it's okay. The gases are going to come out at this angle, and it should just miss. But I'm going to keep an eye on that and make sure that that isn't corroding from the hot gases coming out of the exhaust. Around 94% of the viewers of this channel are not subscribed. I'm sorry to ask, but it would help greatly if you would. Just press the subscribe button. It's free and it shows YouTube you like this vehicle related content. If you want to be notified when new videos are released, click on the bell button also. Thank you. It really helps more than you would imagine. So now let's look at the wiring, and this is where it gets a bit more challenging. Not from fitting it, but actually just understanding these pictorial instructions. So the kit that got supplied is from ECS, and there are other manufacturers offering exactly the same thing. because I've had a look at their instructions online and they seem to be identical wiring harnesses. So the advantage of buying a customized wiring harness to suit the vehicle is that it's basically plug and play. You don't have to start trying to splice wires into the lighting circuits. And while these are expensive, I think they're well worth it. So as you can see, you don't just get wiring. So here we've got some wiring looms that are all made up, and you've got the plugs which go into the existing wiring looms in the vehicle. Your 13-pin trailer socket there is pre-wired, and then you've got the cap for it there. And then you've got this connector, which that circuitry there is going to plug in. I think this is to allow LED trailer lights to not affect your vehicle. And then you've got a protective cover for that, and then you've got various fixings here and cable ties. And this particular assembly, there's the part number there, is for the Nissan NP300 pickup 2016 onwards and the Mercedes and Renault variants. But it's understanding these instructions which is the challenge. I know these sort of pictorial instructions then work for any language, and indeed, as you can see from the label, they've got all sorts of languages on it, so they sell this worldwide. But just having a bit of English or any language, I could translate it, just having a bit of text under each section would really help, because trying to work out what they mean sometimes is hard work. But anyway, I've spent a bit of time studying this and I think I've worked it out, and I'll just briefly go through these instructions first before we start fitting it. So the first area here is giving us 3 options, and this is option 1 here, option 2 there, and option 3 there. And this is basically the earth wire. So it's saying that you can either earth it at the back of the vehicle, and therefore you go to section 8, or you can earth it along the side and you go to section 9, or you can earth it at the front of the vehicle under the bonnet and you go to section 10. And the wiring harness is long enough to use any of those 3 options, and then down here it's telling you which section to refer to. And then you see each connector is boxed and it's showing you which relevant sections in the manual you need to refer to for each part of the assembly. But then further on there are other options. So that was option 1 to 3. There's options A and B here, and this depends on what existing wiring you've got in your vehicle. So this is looking for the positive feed, and if that exists on this connector in the vehicle, then you go to section 4. But if your connector in the vehicle looks like this and you don't have this thicker wire at the bottom of the connector, you go to sections 5 to 11, because then the wiring loom, well actually I think it's then that one there, you provide your own power feed into the harness. And then for the rest of the manual, you just got to make sure you're actually referring to the relevant sections depending on what option you're taking. And then this is where you're plugging it into the existing wiring harnesses which feed the rear lights, and that's where it's going to pick up all the feed. So that's just plug and play. This is your electronic module you've got to attach into the harness and attach it to the vehicle. And then we're back to the options again. So this is where you're going to take that negative feed, whether you take it from the rear of the vehicle or along the side or under the bonnet. And then here we're back to option B again. There's a lot of backwards and forwards in this manual, and this is if you're providing the positive feed from the battery into the wiring loom using this extra one there, if you don't have it in that connector already fitted in the vehicle. And then this is just attaching the socket on the back, and it's as easy as that basically. It's a lot easier when someone explains these diagrams to you, because when you first look at this, it is very confusing. So this is the standard wiring harness for an MP300 for towing trailers. If you're going to tow a caravan and you need a permanent feed, I think they call it a charging feed, but anyway, I think it's the feed for your fridge, then there is an additional extension cable, they call it, which you purchase in addition to this, and that gives you that permanent feed from the vehicle's battery back to your electrical connection there. So first off, we've got a couple of decisions to make, and the first one is this earth connection. So we've got to decide where we want to bolt to the chassis. Do we want to take it from the rear of the vehicle, from the side, or from the front? So at the rear of the vehicle, I think they mean one of these here, and you need to rub the paint off so that crimp on the end of the cable makes good contact with earth. Well, the other option, as I said, is along the side or underneath the bonnet. I'm actually favouring this method because the cable assembly is long enough to reach the front, and your connection is going to be clean and dry there. It isn't going to corrode and get worse over time, because that's my doubt here, is up here is going to be collecting all the water, the muck and the mud, and that's never going to be a good connection in the long term as having one underneath the bonnet where it's dry. So the next option is to see whether your vehicle has the trailer preparation wiring already fitted, because if you don't, you've got to take that second loom to the front of the vehicle anyway, and if that's the case, I'm definitely going to take the earth from the front of the vehicle as well, and I can run both looms together. And this is the diagram where it's showing you where to look to see if you have the trailer preparation wiring already. You've basically got a connector which looks like that, or a connector which looks like that, and it's saying it's here at the rear of the vehicle. So now underneath the vehicle, you've got to see whether you've got that trailer preparation wiring or the connector in question. So this is the harnesses feeding the lights, and this is where we're going to break into as well with our new wiring harness. But that preparation connector is up here on top of the chassis in my case. There's another connector there, but it's not that. It's on next to this cross rail, and it's that one there. And you can probably see it better on the edge, but there it is there. And it's got a blanking connector plugged in the end, but in my case it's got a loop of wire on there in that blanking connector. So the instructions say you remove that blank and throw it away, but I've got a loop in there, so I'm not sure whether I need that. But anyway, the important thing here is we need to check whether we've got a wire in that bottom bit, the bigger hole, and we have. I've got a red positive wire there, and how many have I got in the top, the small ones? Doesn't look like there's any others, so I've just got the permanent feed there, so that's actually what we need. So this is the part of the instructions referring to that, and we're looking for this wire going into the connector here, which is this grey one there, which is actually the red wire. But I don't have all these other wires into that plug like they're showing here. But the other example where they don't have that positive feed, you don't see the wire there. So anyway, I've got this one, even though I don't have all those other wires. So that means I don't need to run that additional wiring loom back to the battery to get a permanent plus 12 volts. So I've just hooked the socket over the tow bar and just strung up the harness with a cable tie up there, just so we can start stringing it in and plug in some of these connectors. But before we do any of that, we do need to disconnect the 12 volt battery and then hook that out of the way. So the first thing I need to do is to remove the insulation tape which is around this connector. And now I can see this better, and we can see it does have the positive feed there and then I've got 2 other wires in the back of it. So I do wonder, yeah, that loop is joining those 2 wires. So I do wonder what I'm going to lose by removing this. But anyway, we've next got to slide this other half off, and you just push that tag up there. You might need to use a little flat blade screwdriver. So with these electrical connectors, it's often very difficult to work out how to separate them, and I am struggling a little bit with this one. But however, because you're plugging something into it, just look at your new loom. In this case, this is what's going to go onto there, and just look at how that works, and then you'll realise what locks into what. And the good news here is this has got the 2 wires in addition to the red 12 volt. So I don't really have to worry now about this loop, because both of those wires are being picked up on here, which is obviously what it wants. But these connectors can still be very awkward, and in this case the way to open this one up is to look at it from this side and push just there with a screwdriver, pushing in just underneath that loop, and that will release the catch, and then you can remove that. So the next step is to plug in the new wiring harness into the lighting circuits. And looking at the back of the vehicle, there's the hole there that we put the tool through to release the spare wheel, and we've got 2 connectors up here. There's also one in the middle there, but we're not using that. So both of these look the same, but you'll notice there's not many wires. There's only 5 wires in that, and there's 8 or so in this one, and that's a white or grey connector. That's the connector we need to break, so we need to separate that and then plug the male and female into those, and that's going to then daisy chain all those connections into our trailer socket. And using some pliers you can release the little prongs on this securing tag and remove it from the chassis, and that makes it a bit easier to work on. And separating this connector is the same. We've just got to push the screwdriver at the top of the capping on this one and push in, and that will release the tag to then slide them apart. And then we simply connect in our wiring loom. As simple as that. So the next job is to put your little box of tricks on the wiring loom, and they're saying spray this with silicone spray first and then slide this outer box on. So this is just a weatherproof box, and they're saying spray the seals there, so you just keep it all watertight after putting the circuit board on there. And then they're also saying with the double-sided pad, stick it up on there. So I don't think the double-sided pad is going to adhere to that, but fortunately there's some lugs on there, so we can put some cable ties through and cable tie that in somewhere. It doesn't have to go there, it can go anywhere in the vehicle. You can push this red rubber hood back up the wiring a bit. It's quite flexible, so it folds in on itself, which allows you to hold the wiring here when you're snapping these 2 together, because that didn't want to go into that very easily at all. Anyway, you don't want to force it, you just want to gently wobble that so you don't break anything. But now that's connected together, I can push that back down. I'm going to paint a bit of silicone grease around the seals and put that in the outer box. So in my case, I've not used that sticky pad, I've just put a cable tie through the loops on the grey case, because there happen to be 2 holes in this bit of metal, so that is suspended there quite fine, it can't go anywhere. And also, if any dampness gets in there, gravity is going to put it into this boot and not into the circuit board. And then once this wiring loom is tie wrapped up there, that's going to support it all as well, so that's not going to go anywhere. So all I've got to do now is connect these 2 to the chassis somewhere to give me an earth connection using one of those 3 options. But there is an awful lot of cable, so if I'm not running it to the front and I was just going to take it to here, then you can cut this and re-crimp it and just ground it there. It's also worth noting there is this other connector on this wiring loom, and it isn't shown in the drawing. But then you'll notice there is no connectors in there. That is full of rubber or silicone. So maybe that is just a crimp joining these two wires together. I'm not sure. But anyway, we obviously don't need to use it, so we can just leave that and ignore it. And then in my case, I don't need to use this second wiring loom which came with the kit, because I don't need to take a 12 volt feed from the battery up front, because it is getting it via this connector here. So in my case, I have decided to route this cable to the front of the vehicle to pick up an earth under the bonnet rather than picking up an earth here. And it's a very simple run to route your cable. I've just routed it along the top of the chassis there, and then down the side here, and then all the way along, because there is already a cable assembly here, so I'm just going to tie wrap that to that one. And then behind the front wheel, that cable is just going to go up behind the wheel arch liner into the engine bay. At the moment, the cable's not fixed, so there is a bit of slack in it there still. And I've got the cable here ready to terminate, but it just comes up in the corner there, behind the brake lines, behind this fuse box, and just round the edge here. And in the front here, there's loads of places you could take an earth from. There's various wires down there that you could piggyback on. There's a stud on the wing there. You've got your main earth just here as well. But just in here, there is a captive nut. And that's what the instructions say to use. So I'm going to use that. And I've taken the paint off there. And I'm just going to put a 10mm bolt in there. And that's then done. But as I said, my reasoning for taking the earth here from under the bonnet is this is relatively dry and that earthing point isn't going to corrode. And it was a very easy run, so it is just as quick to route this cable to the front than it would be to cut this and re-terminate some crimps on the end. And over time this is going to be a more reliable earth point under the bonnet, and I will be spraying that with some paint or probably just some clear lacquer out of a rattle tin once that 10mm bolt is in and these are secured. So that's my earth wiring. All I've got to do now is tidy up that wiring loom and then fit the socket on the tow bar. So now it's just a case of putting the trailer socket together with the bolts provided and then bolting that to the bracket and then tidying up the wiring with the cable ties. These 13-pin trailer sockets do have a habit of corroding over time, so I filled the boot with silicone grease, which will help keep the moisture out the rear. And then you can connect your 12-volt battery back up. And then next we can connect the trailer up to test all the lighting. So that's the left indicator, right indicator, hazards, brake lights, indicators while the brakes are on, side lights, brake lights while they're going, indicators while they're going, and then reverse. Oh, and also do the fog light. That's the fog lights. So the final thing is deciding where you want your tow ball mounted, and a tow ball should be between 350 and 420 centimetres from the ground. That's to the middle of the tow ball, but this is 520, so I certainly don't want it on the top one, and I suspect I'm going to have to use a drop plate. If I measure the tow ball on my Tesla, it is about 410. But with these later Navaras from 2019 having the revised rear springs that kicks the back up a bit, that tow bar is looking rather high. But anyway, I'll have to attach both of my trailers and have a bit of a play. So that will do for this video. If you liked it or found it useful, please do click the thumbs up, that really does help. Do subscribe to the channel. And if you want to know more about the Navara, there'll be a link below to a playlist where you can see other videos I've made. Okie doke, I'll see you on the next one.